What does it mean to say that Kurds are Iranians? And what can their traditions teach us about the very earliest traces of Iranian culture and civilization that we can recover today? Kurds are peoples that live in a very large area in the Middle East. They're the fourth largest nation in the Middle East after Arabs, Persians, and Turks, and they are the world's largest nation without a country. You can see here that these Kurdish majority areas cover a large part of southeastern Turkey, northeastern Syria, northeastern Iraq, and northwestern Iran. Kurdish is not a single language. It's a group of languages. They're usually referred to as dialects, but I think it's probably more accurate to characterize them as languages because the main um, versions of Kurdish, you could say, Kurmanji in the north and Sorani in the south, are not really very mutually intelligible. Maybe an analogy would be like Spanish and Portuguese. So there's not one Kurdish language, but they're related languages, and more broadly, they're related to other Iranian languages, including Persian, of course, but also Ossetian, which is a little further north in the Caucasus, and languages such as Baluch in the southeast of Iran, and also Pakistan and Afghanistan, and other languages of that part of the world, including Pashto. So the Kurds, who number probably 30 to 40 million people today, don't have their own country. That's been a problem for the last 100 years or so ago, given the predominant political ideology in the modern period has been that of the nation state. So the Kurds are a nation without a state. They were promised one at the end of World War I when the British and French were busy carving up the Ottoman Empire and creating states, basically drawing the map that we have of the Middle East today. And in fact, according to the Treaty of Sèvres between the English and the French after World War I, the Kurds were supposed to get a country. And you can see there outlined in red the territory that was supposed to be Kurdistan. And what happened was that in the next few years, there was a war between the Greeks and the Turks. The Greeks lost and got basically pushed out of Anatolia, and part of the agreement to end that war that was agreed between Turkey and the British and the French was that Turkey would relinquish its claims to much of the Middle Eastern territory that had been part of the Ottoman Empire, but that the European countries would recognize Turkey's control over all of Anatolia, which basically that was the end of the discussion of an independent Kurdistan. So Kurds today, quite rightly proud of their very ancient culture. It's one thing to talk about their language, which is clearly an Iranian language, but in terms of their genetic history, of course, in the Middle East, there's been so much back and forth and intermixing over the millennia that there's no pure races in that part of the world at all. And in fact, everybody's got a bit of everybody's DNA. So the Kurdish nation, in genetic terms, it probably consists to a large extent of people who have lived in that part of the world from time immemorial, but with additional admixture of not just Iranians, but many other peoples who have passed through that region. So certainly not an ethnically pure race, if such a thing even exists anywhere. But they, as the inheritors of the history of this part of the world, of course, they're quite proud. So I'm going to focus today on some claims that are made by some Kurds, many Kurds in some cases, about aspects of their cultural history in their part of the world, and in particular their relation to the Iranian elements of their heritage, although that's not the only element. Of course, there are a lot of aspects to Kurdish culture and history that come from other peoples of the region, but we're not going to talk about those too much. So what we see here is evidence of very ancient fire worship. Fire worship is something that is characteristic of the Iranian peoples, but not just them. It's not unique to them, so that in and of itself is not proof of Iranian origins, but there are certain ways that fire was used in cults and certain mythological traditions associated with a fire cult, which can be considered distinctively Iranian. But we don't have texts necessarily internal. Well, we don't have internal Kurdish texts until the modern period. So basically, people who are trying to write or reconstruct Kurdish history, they can pretty much interpret things however they want, because there are no internal texts that can prove them wrong, and because the Kurds mostly historically lived in mountainous areas, somewhat remotely from the centers of urban culture, where written documents were produced. Usually, most of what we know about Kurds was written by other people. So not necessarily positive and not necessarily accurate. What this means is that in the past 150 years or so, that national identity has been a big issue for people around the world. In many cases, there's a process of constructing national identity that goes on. It's usually done by intellectuals, and the Kurds are no exception to this. They've been Kurdish intellectuals for more than a century, attempting to write a Kurdish national history, but not always in ways that correspond to the evidence that we have. And so we're going to raise some questions about that in our discussion here. This is another view of this sacred area, which is just outside the city of Dohuk in the northern part of Iraqi Kurdistan, pretty close to the borders with Turkey and Syria. And there's been a tendency among some Kurdish nationalist intellectuals for the past 100 years or so ago to claim, in terms of this Iranian aspect of their identity, that prior to Islam, that the national religion of the Kurds was Zoroastrianism, which is the official religion of the Iranian state prior to the Islamic Arab conquest in the 7th century. So the Kurds are, in a sense, claiming that, and in a way that even prioritizes themselves. There are claims that the founder of Zoroastrianism, Zarathustra or Zoroaster, was an ethnic Kurd, and that he lived in Kurdistan. These claims are baseless, we can say, on linguistic grounds alone, because the language of the Gathas that are attributed to him are in a northeastern Iranian dialect, which is quite far away from the language of the Kurds, and on other grounds as well. But what gives a little bit of support to the Kurdish claims is that in the Sasanian period, prior to the Islamization of Iran, the Zoroastrian priests themselves claimed that Zoroaster lived in Media, what's now northwestern Iran. The Kurds claim that they are descended from the Medes. Again, this is a claim that could have some truth to it, but because we don't have any documents in the Median language, there's not much to incontrovertibly support that claim. And moreover, DNA tests show that the Kurds very, very close to the Azeris, who also claim that they are the descendants of the Medes. So in a sense, they may both be right. So this is claimed by the Department of Antiquities of the Kurdish region of Iraq, which is a semi-independent Kurdish majority region of northeastern Iraq, and the most, you could say, functional Kurdish political unit in all the areas in different countries that Kurds live. Their official position is that this is a Zoroastrian temple, and this is how they advertise it, and it's become something of a tourist site. There's a city of Dohuk in the distance, so you see that it's quite close to the city. It is up on a hill. It's true that Zoroastrians, but not just them, that Iranian cults in general tended to perform many of their ceremonies at the tops of mountains, but also in caves. And this is a cave that is actually located on that mountainside, Charstin cave. Charstin is Kurdish for four pillars, and you can see the four pillars there. Again, the Department of Antiquities is claiming this is a Zoroastrian site and saying that there were fire ceremonies done, that this was the altar, and that with the kind of brown looking stains you see on the top there, that this is remains of soot from the fire ceremonies. This may or may not be true. Some people have analyzed this and said, no, this is just a kind of bacteria, and it's not proof that fires were that fires were present here. But even if it's bacteria, it's not proof that fires weren't present there, and it certainly looks like an altar. What we see around here is around the edge of the walls is where there was a water channel, and this is typical of pre-Islamic Iranian religion, that there would be a mix of fire and water. And this is reflected in the mythology, the deity associated with fire, the deity associated with water. The water is associated with health and life, and also fertility, while fire is associated with the sun, and typically in Iranian religions with the supreme deity, whoever that's considered to be. In Zoroastrianism, it's considered to be Ahura Mazda or Mast. But there are other pre-Islamic Iranian religious traditions which associate the sun and fire with Mithra. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So this juxtaposition of fire and water, this is something, again, typical of Iranian cults, their rituals and their myths. Very interesting to see in the region around Baku in Azerbaijan, where you actually, because of the petroleum which is underground, you actually see places where there are fires that have been burning perpetually for hundreds of years, and in some cases actually bubbling up through the waters of the shallow banks of the Caspian Sea. So you have this fire and water juxtaposition, which incidentally, if you've been to the Ottawa, Canada, and seen in front of the Parliament building, you've got a fountain, which is the same. It's got this kind of eternal flame coming up out of the water. So kind of an Iranian cultic notion there, which probably whoever designed it had no idea of. So again, keeping with the cave motif, we see here a juxtaposition of fire and water. Um, uh, and it's a little hard to tell, but this is an underground spring, so you can see the water there, which is again juxtaposed with the fire. This is another uh, archaeological remain a little further south in Iraqi Kurdistan in the town of Ahmadiyya. This is, of course, not in a cave, it's exposed. And to the left there, you can see it a little better here. You can see there's a ridge here. This was, again, a water channel. Water would have been running around the side of the of the sanctuary. And again, this site is described by the Department of Antiquities as being Zoroastrian. The problem is that we we have lots of archaeological remains of Zoroastrian temples, and these remains in Iraq don't really correspond to the the, the type that we see that are clearly established as Zoroastrian sites in Iran and other areas. So this has become something of a cornerstone of the Kurdish contemporary Kurdish nation building, is to claim that Zoroastrianism was the pre-Islamic religion of the Kurds, and that Zoroaster himself was an ethnic Kurd. This is a model of Kurdistan passport, which doesn't. It's not a real passport because it's not Kurdistan is not recognized as a country by anybody. But it's interesting to see that they've got the Zoroastrian fervat right there on the passport. Here in Syria, in the town of Afrin, they've actually put up a statue of Zoroaster. And all over the region, you have businesses that have adopted Zoroastrian terms, names. The Avesta, of course, the sacred book of the Zoroastrians, is now been taken as name of different shops, clothing stores, bookstores, restaurants, and even here in Montreal, we have a Kurdish-run restaurant called Avesta, which is advertising Turkish cuisine. And here up at the top, you can see that they've put fravar as well. And in the past 10 years or so, this movement, well, this was very much provoked by the fact that much of the Kurdish region of Iraq and Syria was taken over by Islamic State, Daesh, extremist organization that was very, very actively persecuting, repressing non-Sunni communities, and even Sunnis that they didn't think that were Sunni enough or Islamic enough. So that was quite a traumatic few years for this part of the world, in Iraq and Syria in particular. And that actually had the effect of turning a lot of Kurds against Islam. And this led to an explosion of interest in the allegedly pre-Islamic and therefore more authentically Kurdish religion of Zoroastrianism, and such that the Kurdistan regional government, the KRG in Iraq, recognized Zoroastrianism as an officially recognized religion alongside of Islam within the Kurdistan region, and actually started allocating funds for the construction of Zoroastrian temples. And so there's been quite a growth of people in Kurdistan who are actively and openly identifying as Zoroastrian, and getting government support for this. Where it gets a little bit messy is that this started with some of these Kurdish intellectuals some decades ago that basically conflated Zoroastrianism, which they clearly didn't understand very well, with a very distinctly local Kurdish religious tradition, which is the Yazidi tradition, which for the past 800 years or so have suffered a lot of negative propaganda on the part of their Sunni Muslim neighbors who have characterized them as devil worshippers, which is inaccurate. And I won't get into the details of that too much. But the Yazidi tradition began, well, it took its present shape from the 12th, 13th centuries onwards as a result of the activities of a Lebanese Sufi who had come to the Kurdish mountains, this region, and began to proselytize, teach the locals, and as was often the case with Sufi teachers trying to spread Islam, he was very, very tolerant and open to their maintaining their pre-existing, pre-Islamic traditions, beliefs, rituals, and so forth, and just giving them a kind of Islamic veneer. And what happened, and this happened all over the world with Sufis spreading Islam, and that's why we have a lot of local differences in how Islam is practiced around the world, because there are local traditions that were adopted and Islamicized mainly by Sufis. But in some cases, this tolerance goes to the point where you really don't see much in the way of Islam. And by the 14th century, I think we can say that the peoples of this region basically had come to feel that what the Yazidis believed and did really could not be considered Islamic. So there are a lot of names of figures and terminologies that the Yazidis have maintained since then, which come from Islam, but in many cases we even know the names and terms that predate Islam, that these Islamic terms replaced. Now, for example, we have the underground spring that I showed you a few slides ago is called Zamzam by the Yazidis, which is obviously taken from the Islamic concept, Zamzam well in the Hijaz. But it's obviously its cultic importance for the Kurds is much more ancient than Islam. What you see here on the sweatshirt is a peacock, and in fact, the principal divine figure for the Yazidis is the Malika Taus, which is the peacock king. The Yazidis live in these shaded areas mainly. Around here, Lalish is the center of their most important shrines. So you see just outside the major Iraqi city of Mosul. Erbil here is the capital of the Kurdish regional government. Down here you have Suleymaniye, which is the most important town in the south. Up here you have Dohuk, which is not labeled here, and then over here you have the Shingal Ridge, which is a mountainous region, where as a result of the attacks by Daesh, there were many Yazidi refugees that had to flee. Many were enslaved, murdered by Islamic State. So this region was very much in the news back in 2014, 2015. So here we are in Lalish, and this is the principal shrine to Sheikh Adi, who is the Sufi master that I mentioned before. And this is this conical architecture is distinctive of Yazidi temples. And here you have inside in the courtyard, and at this time this picture was taken in 2015, so these people, there were a lot of refugees that were living here at the time. This region was not taken over by Daesh, so this was kind of a safe haven for people who had fled from Shingal and other areas. You see um, that people just living their lives. Lots of women and children. Of course, the men, many of them were off fighting. And here's the entrance to the shrine. You have the snake here on the side, very ancient religious symbol from that part of the world, which is not part of the Iranian tradition. Um, and here you have inside the temple, you have a tapestry depicting Tawus Malik, the peacock king. And here's the tomb of Sheikh Adi, who lived in the 11th and 12th centuries. So it's a site of pilgrimage. So they have many, many particular rituals that they do this at their New Year. They celebrate the New Year around the same time as the Persians, a little later, early April. They have the springtime New Year, and then they put up these flowers. They stick them to the walls inside the shrine as a sign of the renewal of the year. You have here again the combination of fire and water inside the cave, and this young man here is collecting, uh, well, donations to the temple. There are different rituals that are done inside the cave here. You can't really make it out, but against the wall there's a little kind of niche, and people will come and they will take a wet rag and they will toss it and try to get it to hang on the niche. And so I think most of them don't necessarily know the origin of this ritual or what it actually means. It's just something that you do when you get there. Or they might know and not tell you. The Yazidi tradition is esoteric, which means that you as an outsider, you cannot really know what they do or what they believe. And in fact, a friend of mine who is from that community and was taking me around, every time I'd ask him a question about the tradition, he'd say, actually, I don't know the answer to that. My grandmother knows, but she refuses to tell me because she says that I've been contaminated by spending too much time with Muslims. So it's obviously a very protective tradition, and so whatever outsiders say about it or think they know about it, there's really no guarantee that they're right. But as my friend indicated, even if you are an insider, you might not necessarily know because the sacred knowledge is jealously guarded against anyone who isn't felt to deserve it. So here's another ritual that is done. This is actually a tree that is grown inside the cave and grown through the roof of the cave and emerges outside. And the belief is that if you can touch your fingers by wrapping your arms around the tree trunk, then your wishes will come true. And I'm happy to say that my fingers reached. So there are Yazidi communities as well in Armenia and in Georgia, and this is a newly built Yazidi temple just outside Tbilisi near the airport, showing that the community is definitely alive and thriving. So just to quickly note some Iranian elements in Yazidism, and again, there are many non-Iranian elements which you would expect because these people have been there in this very multicultural environment for thousands of years. So they have influences from all over. But if we focus on the Iranian elements, praying facing the sun, we see that in other Iranian traditions, not just Zoroastrianism, but others as well. Bull sacrifice during their major annual ritual, which is called the Festival of the Assembly, or Zhezhnaya, which is similar to the Zoroastrian Mehrgan, which is the festival of Mithra, and also the Ossetian Jogoba, which is also similar to, well, it's basically all three are harvest festivals held in the fall. And the fact that in Zoroastrianism it's associated with Mithra, and that we see also in Yezidism and in the Ossetian popular religion, I think lends support to the idea that that prior to Zoroastrianism, that probably Mithra was uh, the supreme deity in the Iranian pantheon. But this is speculation, and this is the point is that when you're going so far back into prehistory, really speculation is all you've got. Nobody can, people can have different theories and interpretations, but you can't really prove anything. But if you assemble enough sort of, you could say, circumstantial evidence or indications, some theories I think can seem to carry more weight than others. Another Iranian element is the pantheon made up of seven major divine figures, so a divine heptad, which Yazidis called the Haftsir, which is like seven secrets. And again, the Zoroastrians and Ossetians both have very analogous pantheons of seven supreme figures, and you can see amongst the seven there are in most cases correspondences, clear correspondences between these different traditions. In the Yazidi mythology, we have, similar to in the Zoroastrian mythology, that the world will be perfected after a final battle and become smooth like an egg, which is interesting that mountains are considered to be something disruptive and ultimately evil, but for the Kurds, I mean, the mountains have been their home, and there's a Kurdish saying that our only friends are the mountains, because they've been betrayed by basically everybody throughout their history. There's also a taboo on pronouncing the name of the principal deity, which we also see amongst the Scythians, who are the ancestors to today's Ossetians, and I suspect that this principal deity that you're not allowed to name may originally have been Mithra. So the bull sacrifice, again, very central to this annual ceremony, which takes place in the fall, which was the case again for the Zoroastrians, for the Ossetes, and also for the Yazidis and some other Kurdish groups. And here you have a bull being led to sacrifice during the festival, the assembly. It's not a big bull, it's a young bull. So we move to another group, Kurdish sect, you could say, on the other side of the border in Iran, very close to where the Yazidis are living, but on the Iranian side of the border. They're known as the Yaresan, or sometimes by the Arabic term Ahle Haq, or the people of the divine truth. This is one of their main villages, Gahvare, which is in the Kermanshah region of Iran. And the Yaresan are interesting for a number of reasons. They're very similar to the Yazidis in that they are an esoteric and secretive tradition. You cannot really participate or know about what they do or the meaning of what they do as an outsider. And publicly, they identify as Twelver Shiite Muslims, but that's clearly just a way of managing their relations with the majority of Iran and not having problems with them. These people live off in the mountains and villages, and they mind their own business, and there seems to be a kind of tacit agreement between their community and the Iranian government that the government won't bother them, and they will not rebel or cause any kinds of problems. So what's characteristic of the Yaresan is that their ritual life, their religious life, is all about music. It's just singing, singing hymns. That's what they do. So they sit around. Usually they'll gather in a circle like this in a room, and then they'll just start playing music and singing. Sometimes it's much larger groups as we see here. But that seems to be pretty much what they do. That's the nature of their religious life, and their community life in general is music. If you look at the lyrics, the words, what you can sort of tease out their mythology and their worldviews, which turn out to be very, very close to those of the Yazidis, and in many cases identifiably Iranian. Here you have one of their sanctuaries in and nearby we have this site which is apparently an Achaemenid site going back about 2,500 years almost. But because it's situated in an area where these Yarasan are living, they've given it their own meaning and their own interpretation. And they have their own ritual which is associated with it. So you can see they call it Dukane Davud, David's shop. Don't really know where that comes from, but it's a tomb of somebody important, probably from the Achaemenid period. But what they do now is that they climb up there and they throw these green rags up against the wall, and similar to what the Yazidis are doing in the cave with the wet rag. They throw it up there and they try to get it to catch onto the wall. And you can see people on their way up there. You can see some of the green rags, which are here. And yeah, you can see it's quite a steep climb. So back to the notion of Mithra, we have echoes of Mithraism all over the Iranian world, and what's tantalizing and confusing about it is there are no surviving texts. So and Mithraism is always an esoteric, therefore secretive uh, tradition that outsiders could not really know about. And I suppose if an insider ever wanted to share any of that information, it was, one of these, I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you situations. So we don't know that much about the Mithra cult, but we do know that they had 7 stages of initiation for the devotee. At each stage, your spiritual advancement would bring you to a new level. But we also know that the principal ceremony was the ritual killing of a bull, and Mithra himself in Iranian iconography was often represented as a lion. So we see this imagery of the lion killing a bull all over the Iranian world, and in this, Kurdish regions. We have here in Diyarbakir, Turkey, which the Turkish Kurds consider to be their unofficial capital. We have the Friday Mosque, which dates back to the Seljuk period, and lo and behold, we have this Mithraic image on the as a decoration on the mosque. And interestingly, a few blocks away, there's a Christian church, Church of St. George, which has basically the same thing. So again, this seems to be something that really has permeated the culture from ancient times, but in a way that probably most people don't have any recollection of or really understand where it comes from. But in short, I would conclude by suggesting that, contrary to the claims of some Kurdish nationalists looking for more authentic original religion, that in the Kurdish case, we're probably not talking about Zoroastrianism, but rather some form of Mithraism.